Welcome back to Midlife Awakening, where we talk about what it really looks like to walk with God in the middle of everyday life. I'm Z, and I'm truly grateful you're here with me today. As we step into a new year, I've been thinking a lot about faith, not the kind that sounds good in conversation or looks impressive on the outside, but the kind of faith that keeps moving forward when things feel uncertain, quiet, or even overwhelming. Because if we're honest, new beginnings can feel both hopeful and heavy at the same time. We carry expectations, prayers, unresolved questions, and sometimes fears we don't even have words for yet. And somewhere in the middle of all that, God is still calling us forward. There are moments when the world around us seems to be moving confidently in one direction, while God gently but clearly calls us in another. And that can feel a bit scary, lonely. It can feel confusing, and it can feel costly. That's why today I want to spend some time with the story of Elijah, a man whose faith reminds us that standing with God doesn't always come with applause, agreement, or ease. Sometimes it simply comes with obedience. Elijah lived in a season when faithfulness to God was no longer the norm. Israel had slowly drifted away, influenced by surrounding cultures and led by rulers who openly rejected the Lord. Idolatry wasn't hidden, it was celebrated. The voices were loud, the pressure was real, and following God meant standing against the current. And into that moment, God calls Elijah, not because Elijah was perfect, not because he was powerful on his own, but because he was willing to listen and respond. That's something I don't want us to miss. God didn't ask Elijah to shout people down or argue them into belief. He asked him to trust, to obey, and to stand firm even when he felt outnumbered. And maybe that's where this story meets us today. As we enter a new year, many of us will face moments, big or small, where following God requires courage. It might be choosing integrity when cutting corners would be easier. It might be saying yes to something God places on your heart, even when you don't feel ready. Or it might be quietly holding onto God's promises when nothing around you seems to confirm them yet. Elijah's life shows us that courage isn't about being louder than everyone else. It's about being faithful to the one who has always been faithful to us. One of the most well-known moments in Elijah's story is the showdown on Mount Carmel, where he faces 450 prophets of Baal. From a human perspective, the odds were overwhelming. Elijah was one man standing against hundreds, backed by a culture that had already chosen sides. But Elijah never measured the moment by numbers. He didn't step forward because he felt confident in himself. He stepped forward because he trusted God. And I think that's important for us to hear, especially in a season where comparison is everywhere. It's easy to measure our faith against someone else's progress, to feel behind, to feel small, to feel like our obedience doesn't count unless it's visible or validated. Elijah reminds us that faith isn't about keeping up with the crowd. It's about keeping in step with God. Before the fire ever fell from heaven, Elijah did something quiet but powerful. He prepared the altar. He arranged the stones, He placed the wood. He followed God's instructions carefully and completely. There was no rush, no performance, no shortcuts. And that speaks to me deeply. Faith isn't impulsive, it's intentional. As we move into this year, there's wisdom in slowing down enough to listen, in asking God how He wants us to build, not just what He wants us to do, in preparing our hearts before we expect breakthrough. Sometimes we want the fire without the altar. We want results without surrender. We want clarity without obedience. But Elijah shows us that faith begins long before the miracle. It begins in preparation. And then God moved. Fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water surrounding the altar. And there was no mistaking who was responsible. It wasn't Elijah's skill. It wasn't his courage. It wasn't his effort. It was God. And that's such a freeing truth for us. Our role is faithfulness. God's role is power. Sometimes God's work in our lives shows up in dramatic ways. Other times, it unfolds quietly. A door opens you didn't expect. A relationship begins to heal. A burden lifts slowly instead of all at once. But the outcome has never depended on our strength alone. After the fire fell, the people recognized God's authority, not because Elijah elevated himself, but because he stayed faithful. And that's what faith can still do today. When we walk with God, when we choose obedience in unseen places, our lives become a reflection of His faithfulness. Not to make much of us, but to point others back to Him. Elijah didn't walk away from that moment into ease. His story reminds us that faith doesn't exempt us from exhaustion, fear, or vulnerability, but it does anchor us in the truth that God remains present through it all. And maybe that's the encouragement someone needs today. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to feel fearless. You don't have to stand with a crowd. You just have to keep walking with God. As this new year unfolds, let Elijah's story remind you, one person trusting God fully can make space for God to move powerfully. Your faith doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be impressive. It just needs to be anchored in Him. So step forward with trust, move with intention, prepare your heart, and leave the outcome in God's hands. He is still faithful, He is still present, and He is still at work even when you're standing alone. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this episode encouraged you, I hope you'll carry it with you in the days ahead. And as always, may this season awaken deeper faith, renewed courage, and a steadiness that comes from walking closely with God. Until next time, my name is Z. I'm grateful for you, and I'm praying you continue to walk forward one faithful step at a time.